Hey, welcome to HOA Karen Cases.
I thought the land would be quiet when I came back. 12 acres, no neighbors close enough to matter, just wind, just fences, just memory. The first thing waiting for me was paper. Bright, official, uninvited. I ignored it. Then the envelope came, certified, stamped. They said I owed them, said they had jurisdiction. I never signed anything. 3 days later, she showed up. White SUV. Clipboard. Smile that didn't reach her eyes. She spoke like the land already belonged to her. But paper can lie. So I measured the line myself, pulled the deed, checked the records, and the more I looked, the smaller their authority became. They thought I'd pay to make it disappear. Instead, I made them prove it. And that's when the silence changed. Because this wasn't about grass, it was about ownership. And I don't surrender land to a signature that isn't mine. I pulled off the county road just past noon, tires crunching through dry gravel as I slowed beneath the warped wooden archway that still bore my uncle's brand, 2 offset R's carved into the beam. The gate creaked open with the same resistance it had always had, metal hinges grumbling like they remembered me. 12 acres of sun-bleached pasture and time-worn fencing stretched ahead, quiet except for the soft whistle of wind across brittle grass. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe I'd gotten taller, or maybe time just made everything shrink. I parked beside the barn and stepped out, boots kicking up dust that hadn't been disturbed in months. The air carried that crisp late autumn edge, cool enough to promise the first frost soon, but warm enough to let the sun sting my neck. The silence was heavy, and no nearby highway, no barking dogs. Just the groan of settling wood and the distant buzz of power lines. It had been 9 months since I inherited the land. I'd put off coming back longer than I'd admit, told myself I was waiting for probate, waiting for paperwork. But really, I was waiting to stop feeling guilty about letting the ranch go quiet. My uncle raised me like I was his own after Dad left, and this place was all he had left to pass down. Now it was mine. I didn't expect the first thing to greet me to be bright orange. There it was, taped right to the front gate with blue painter's tape, already starting to curl at the corners. I walked back toward it, confused, and peeled it free with 2 fingers. The paper crinkled like old leaves, bold black typeface, all caps. You've notice of violation, Ridgeway Hills, HOA property. ID, unlisted address, 1425 Ridge Hollow Road. Violation code, 4.1, inoperative equipment, weeds/overgrowth. Status, unpaid HOA assessment balance, due $3,712.47. This property is in violation of Ridgeway Hills Community Guidelines. Compliance required within 10 days. Failure to comply may result in fines, lien, or legal action. I stared at it. Ridgeway Hills? I wasn't part of any HOA. My name wasn't on the notice, just current occupant. No phone number, no contact signature, just a seal at the bottom with a stylized oak leaf and the words, Ridgeway Hills Property Management Committee. I read it twice, then flipped it over. Blank. Had I missed something in the estate paperwork? Had my uncle somehow signed onto a homeowners association without telling me? No way. He hated suits, and he hated rules even more. I folded the notice and shoved it into my back pocket, trying to laugh it off. Probably a mistake, some automated system misfiring. Still, I walked the perimeter after I unpacked, half out of caution, half out of curiosity. The old fences still stood in their jagged, stubborn way. No signs, no new markers, just cracked cedar posts and rusted barbed wire. The next morning, I stopped at the feed store in town. Needed nails, fencing staples, and a new post level. The cashier looked up as I dropped the box on the counter and said, "You're over on Ridge Hollow, right?" I nodded. "Just moved back in, my uncle's place." He gave a short whistle. "You get that orange letter yet?" That made me pause. "From who?" I asked, though I already knew. HOA, he said, like it was normal. They've been annexing properties for a few years now. Call it voluntary expansion. Voluntary for who? He shrugged. Board says it's for everyone's benefit. Keeps the valley looking nice. I didn't respond. Just paid in cash and left. On the drive back, I noticed other mailboxes, plastic Ridgeway placards attached beneath the numbers. I'd never seen them before. Some homes had neat signs near their driveways too, with proud HOA member etched into faux stone slabs. Others had nothing, no tags, no signs. Just like mine. That night, I pulled out the filing box my uncle had kept in the closet, yellowed folders, a cracked calculator, a small jar of old stamps. Inside were the real records. The original deed from 1986, sealed with blue ink and notarized. Old property lines defined by meets and bounds, starting at the edge of Ridge Hollow Creek and running north to the old cattle fence, then east toward the ridge. Clear. Uninterrupted. No encumbrances, no HOA affiliation. I found a hand-sketched plat map with boundary notes in my uncle's handwriting. No community oversight, written in bold black marker in the bottom margin. He knew exactly what he was doing, and now they were trying to undo it. I scanned everything, deed, survey, plat, just in case. Then I pinned the orange notice to the corkboard above the desk and stared at it for a long while. I told myself it was probably over. It wasn't. 3 days later, I heard the sound of tires on gravel just after noon. When I stepped out to check, no one was there. But a certified envelope was rubber banded to my gatepost. And inside was a letter that made my jaw tighten. Dear property owner, our records show your failure to comply with Ridgeway Hills. HOA guidelines has resulted in escalating fees and administrative costs. As of this notice, your unpaid balance is $4,321.33. This constitutes a lien against your property pursuant to Section 12.8 of the Ridgeway Hills Community Covenant. If unresolved, additional legal action may be pursued. Sincerely, Ridgeway Hills Compliance Committee. No signature, just a stamped seal. It felt like a threat designed by committee. I leaned against the porch post and stared out at the land. The grass swayed in the wind. My uncle's old windmill clinked in the distance. Nothing had changed out here except the paperwork, except the creeping reach of a group I never joined, trying to tell me I belonged to them. This wasn't about grass height or equipment storage. This was a land grab by clipboard, and I wasn't going to play dumb. I scanned the letter and texted it to Jacob, an old friend who practiced real estate law in the next county over. 30 minutes later, he called. They're bluffing, he said. They have no legal grounds unless you signed into their HOA, did you? Never, I told him. Then they're posturing, but that doesn't mean they won't escalate. We'll need to dig into how they filed that annexation. Sometimes they try boundary overlays. Sometimes they fabricate consent. He paused, then added, get your deed scanned, keep records, and do not respond to them directly. Everything in writing from now on. I thanked him, hung up, and sat down at the old kitchen table with a blank notepad. I titled the first page, Ridgeway Hills, Unauthorized Action Log. The next line, Day 1, Orange Notice taped to gate. I tapped the pen against the paper and looked out the window at the back pasture, where the boundary line ran up to the rise before vanishing behind a row of cottonwoods. This land wasn't theirs, not by law, not by blood. And if they wanted a fight, they were going to have to walk through every page of my uncle's deed to get it. I was setting a replacement post near the creek bed when I heard the sound. Not wind, not birds. Tires on gravel, slow, deliberate. I stood up, wiping sweat off my forehead with the back of my glove. The sun sat high and sharp, glinting off a white SUV as it crested the hill and came rolling up my drive like it owned the right to be there. Logos on the door. Ridgeway Hills, HOA. I dropped the hammer. 3 people stepped out. One woman led, mid-50s, styled hair that didn't belong in dirt country. It had pearl earrings and a clipboard tucked tight under her arm like it was a weapon. Her khakis were pressed, her shoes too clean for the gravel. Behind her, a man and another woman hung back like a security detail. No smiles, no introductions. Just presence. Karen. She didn't need a name tag. I recognized her type before she spoke. She looked at me like I was already in violation of something she hadn't written yet. Mr. Rhodes? She asked, voice pleasant enough. I nodded. That's me. I'm Karen, president of the Ridgeway Hills Homeowners Association. We're just stopping by to touch base now that you've reoccupied the property. She gestured behind her with the clipboard like it justified the intrusion. This won't take long. I didn't invite her in. she stepped forward anyway. She walked toward the gate like she owned it, at stopping just short of the post where the orange notice had been. She glanced at the pasture, then back at me. "I'm sure you've seen the courtesy notices we left," she said, tone still syrupy. "It's just part of our compliance sweep, standard for all returning members." I let the silence hang long enough to make her nervous. "I'm not a member," I said. Her lips twitched. "Well, technically, your parcel was annexed into Ridgeway Hills 5 years ago during our Phase 3 boundary update, so by community covenant, you're within our jurisdiction." She said it like she was reading from a teleprompter, confident, scripted. I tilted my head. "I didn't sign anything, neither did my uncle." Karen smiled the way only people in power do when they know they're about to lie. "And the annexation was done by unanimous vote of the board under our expansion clause," she said. "You wouldn't have needed to sign. The land was incorporated into the community overlay for maintenance and appearance standards." I raised a brow. "You're telling me a committee vote lets you take jurisdiction over private ranch land that predates your subdivision?" She held up the clipboard and flipped through a few pages. The Ridge Hollow corridor was included under updated enforcement zones in 2021. We have the map on file, if you'd like to review it. You're listed as Parcel 14-62. The dues, backdated, unfortunately, have accrued since the overlay was recorded. She flipped the page again. Totaling $4,321, including landscaping violations and non-member penalty rates. I blinked, more impressed than angry. It takes a special kind of bold to show up to someone's ranch, claim it belongs to your HOA, and hand them a bill. "No one notified me," I said. "And there's no legal annexation in the deed. You have a map. I have a signed boundary." Karen nodded as if she expected that. "The board's annexation authority is a matter of internal governance, not individual consent." She actually said that out loud. I took a step toward the gate and leaned on the post, eyes locked on hers. "You've got 30 seconds to take your clipboards and leave." Her expression didn't change, but her voice lost a bit of that buttery tone. "We're trying to avoid escalation, Mr. Rhodes. You're not the first to challenge our enforcement, but you should know we've prevailed in every dispute." I smiled, just a little. Then you haven't run into someone who's read a deed before." The man beside her scribbled something onto a form. The second woman avoided eye contact. Karen gave a tight nod and stepped back. "Well," she said, tone colder now, "we'll be in touch." The three of them turned back toward the SUV. Gravel crunched under their polished shoes. As they drove off, the white Ridgeway Hills logo on the bumper shimmered like a brand you couldn't scrub off. I locked the gate behind them, not out of fear, out of habit, because that wasn't the last time they'd show up. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the file again. Survey, deed, notes. I read through each line with a fresh sense of urgency. The language was explicit. No shared subdivision interest or subjecting covenant shall apply unless voluntarily recorded by current owner as of record. Not ambiguous, not optional. My uncle made damn sure this land stayed separate. I traced the boundary on the map again, then cross-checked it against the copy Karen had handed me, printed from their website, highlighter still wet on the corners. Her map showed a shaded overlay zone that extended into my lower pasture, but it didn't match any county record. They were hoping I didn't know how to read legal land descriptions, or that I'd fold under pressure. Instead, I opened a new folder on my desktop, Ridgeway Claim, Dispute Evidence. Later that afternoon, I walked the west fence line, where my property edged closest to the HOA's actual boundary. It was quiet, golden hour light spilling over the grass like honey. I leaned on one of the old cedar posts and looked back toward the house. Karen wasn't just trying to bill me. She was trying to claim me. They hadn't asked, they hadn't warned. They'd just drawn a new line on a map and started collecting. And judging by the way she'd spoken, like a principal scolding a student, I wasn't the first, but maybe I'd be the last. That night, I printed everything, her overlay, my deed, a copy of the certified lien threat from the week before. I stapled them to the corkboard in a neat row. Then I added a sticky note above them. Bluffing works until someone calls it. Karen didn't know it yet, but I wasn't just holding the line. I was about to redraw it. The envelope was thick, certified mail, my name printed clean across the label. I found it rubber banded to the gate one morning, flapping like a warning flag in the wind. No one rang the bell. No truck idled at the bottom of the drive. Whoever delivered it didn't want to talk. I took it to the porch, and I sliced the seal with my pocket knife and pulled out the document inside. Notice of Lien, Ridgeway Hills, HOA, amount owed, $4,321.33. Breakdown, annual assessment says 5 years, $2,500. Compliance fines, $750. Administrative fees, $618. Enforcement processing fee, $453.33, effective immediately. This lien has been filed with Ridge County Records Office. Property shall remain encumbered until full payment is rendered or civil action concludes. Future enforcement may include recovery of debt, legal fees, or asset seizure. Stamped, no signature, just a barcode. I leaned back in the old rocking chair and stared across the field. The sun was rising slow, gold leaking through cottonwoods. I tried to feel calm, logical. But there it was, in black and white. Someone pretending they had power over what I'd inherited. The sound of the rocking chair creaking under me was the only thing that kept me from snapping the letter in half. I called Jacob. He picked up on the second ring. "Talk to me. I just got a lien, $4,000 and change. They filed it." He paused. "Karen? Stamped Ridgeway Hills, certified." He exhaled through his nose. "You scanned it yet?" "Just about to." "Good. Send it. Don't shred anything." An hour later, Jacob pulled into the drive. He stepped out of his truck with 2 things, a binder and a bottle of gas station iced coffee. He sat across from me on the porch and flipped through the packet. "This is classic HOA overreach," he said. "They're trying to intimidate you. The lien might be filed, sure, but its legal foundation depends on membership, consent, and contract. You have none." I nodded. "They're hoping I don't fight it." He closed the binder. "They're not stupid, just entitled. Most folks cave when they see Lien printed in bold, but this isn't enforceable if you were never part of the association. And the fact I have the deed, the exclusion clause," Jacob smiled. "That's the hammer." That night, I cleared the kitchen table and spread out everything I had: deed, plat maps, the first orange notice, Karen's ridiculous member ID packet, and now the lien. I stared at the timeline I'd started building. Day 1, fluorescent violation notice. Day 4, Karen shows up. Day 10, certified lien. Fast, aggressive, coordinated. This wasn't accidental. It was a power play. I opened my laptop and logged into the county's public records portal. A parcel search was clunky, decades-old interface, but I knew the APN by heart now. I pulled up everything tagged to my property. No HOA documents, no annexation agreements, no change of use, no signed consents, no quiet title filings. Just 3 decades of tax assessments and the original title description from when my uncle bought the land in '86. I cross-referenced it with Ridgeway Hills. Their boundary expansion had been recorded in 2021. It showed a neat polygon that extended like a greedy finger into my pasture. But overlays don't rewrite deeds, and Karen had skipped the part where she actually proved ownership. I screen captured everything: parcel overlays, zoning lines, plat filings. I circled the inconsistencies in red. Then I made a folder, RH-HOA, _Lien, _dispute, _2021 to 2026. Just in case this dragged out. I couldn't afford to play this casual. I wasn't just protecting grass and soil. I was defending legacy, something my uncle had spent his whole life preserving. His final wish wasn't a handshake or a trust fund. It was this land, untouched and unclaimed by anyone but blood. And now, Karen wanted to turn that into a newsletter and monthly fees. The next morning, I returned to the county site and dug deeper into Ridgeway Hills filings. They had recorded a community overlay jurisdiction map with 2 supporting documents. One was a scanned board vote, and the other was missing signatures. No recorded notices to affected landowners, no mailed consents, just a digital scan of a map with someone's initials scrawled in the corner. I printed it, highlighted the date, March 2021, right in the middle of the lockdown period. They'd slipped it in while everyone else was focused on surviving. I sent the findings to Jacob. An hour later, he responded with one word: illegal. I walked the perimeter that afternoon, clipboard in hand, scribbling notes as I followed the old wire line my uncle had laid. The cedar posts were weathered but firm. The field smelled of dust and wind. I thought back to being 16, chasing a loose calf across this same stretch of pasture, my uncle laughing from the hilltop. That was ownership. That was what mattered. Karen had never walked this land. She didn't know the story buried under the soil, but she thought a digital overlay and a committee vote could undo history. Not on my watch. By sunset, I'd drafted a timeline, a list of inconsistencies, and a formal letter of dispute addressed to both the HOA and their lien processor. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Notice of challenge to unauthorized lien, property not subject to jurisdiction." At the bottom, I attached a scanned copy of the deed with the exclusion clause, highlighted county assessor records showing no HOA affiliation, GIS overlay showing boundary mismatch, screenshots of the Ridgeway filings with missing signatures. The lien notice itself, redacted for effect. I didn't mail it yet. Instead, I stared at the closing line I'd typed. Any continued collection effort will constitute harassment and be documented as part of legal escalation proceedings. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot, but Karen had weaponized paper. Now it was my turn. There's something about finding the truth in old paper. Not a PDF, not a map on a screen, but ink, edges, weight. Now I spent the better part of the morning clearing out my uncle's old desk drawers, drawer by drawer, layer by layer, dust thick enough to choke a memory. I'd searched through most of his filing cabinet before, but I hadn't looked under the stack labeled water rights and old bills. That's where I found the envelope, yellowed, sealed with one rusted paperclip, labeled in his sharp mechanical handwriting, 1986, Survey Plus, Original Plat, Do Not Alter. I opened it like it was sacred. Inside, a folded land survey, still crisp, drawn in blue line, full legal boundary description, compass bearings, perimeter lengths, the kind of survey you can build a life on. I laid it flat on the kitchen table and smoothed the corners with my palms. 12 acres, bounded by Ridge Hollow Creek to the west, the high pasture to the east, and the county road to the south. No notations, no overlays, no annexation, just mine. For contrast, I pulled up the Ridgeway Hills Community Expansion Plan again on their website. The overlay map loaded slowly on the HOA portal, clean, modern, color-coded, like a subdivision sales pitch. My land was shaded in light green, tagged as Zone 3, Annex 2021, part of the HOA's Valley Perimeter Cohesion Corridor, whatever that meant. There was a thin, bright orange line that cut diagonally through my upper field and clipped across the pasture. But here's what stopped me cold. That boundary line didn't follow any natural division. It didn't track with the creek, the roads, or even the original survey grid. It looked like someone had drawn it using a computer mouse, with zero reference to how the land actually worked. It was a lie dressed up in GIS, and they'd filed it like it was law. I opened the county recorder's digital archives. Parcel 1462, my land, had 2 filings attached to it in the past 5 years. 1. The 2021 Community Jurisdiction Overlay from Ridgeway Hills. 2. A tax status update showing no change in assessment category. The overlay was entered by a clerk, digitally received, scanned, uploaded, and labeled as Community Document Informational Use. No accompanying annexation agreement. No quiet title judgment. No signatures from affected owners. Just a map with a stamp and the phrase, Boundary per Ridgeway Hills, HOA, expansion vote. I leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking beneath me. I stared at that line. That one decision, recorded in silence, was the root of everything. They hadn't won a legal case. They hadn't served a notice. They'd just uploaded a boundary and hoped no one would check. I printed both maps, mine and theirs. Then I grabbed a red Sharpie and traced the real boundary over the HOA's copy, just to see how far they'd overreached. At one point, their overlay extended nearly 200 feet onto my property, carving off a sliver of pasture that included my fire pit and the side of my tool shed. I pulled out the plat survey again, double-checked the bearings. They were wrong by half a degree on the west line. That might not sound like much, but on a 12-acre parcel, That meant they were claiming land they didn't own, based on a map no judge had ever reviewed. I texted Jacob. Got the original survey. GIS map is wrong, major boundary mismatch. Thus, they didn't file quiet title. His reply came a minute later. That's the nail. Overlay not equal authority. If they didn't serve you notice and didn't get judgment, their expansion is meaningless. I took a photo of the map with my uncle's survey laid over the Ridgeway version and sent it to him. Then I wrote a header on my legal pad. Doctrine of notice, violated. And underneath it, no service, no consent, no recorded amendment, no court order. Karen had skipped the legal legwork and gambled on no one looking. That night, I gathered everything into a folder. I labeled it Boundary Dispute, Evidence Package A. I included the 1986 original survey, the 2021 HOA, overlay map, GIS screenshots, parcel reports from the county, a list of statutory violations Jacob flagged. I slipped it all into a binder and set it next to my laptop. Then I took a copy of the Ridgeway overlay and pinned it beside the front door, next to the fluorescent notice and the lien letter. My wall was starting to look like a caseboard, but this wasn't conspiracy. This was negligence, and it had Karen's fingerprints all over it. The wind howled that night. I heard it press against the windows, whistle through the eaves like it was trying to get inside. I walked out onto the porch and looked up at the stars. The ridgeline in the distance was dark, just a silhouette against the starlit sky. Out there, on the edge of my land, was a corner post my uncle had sunk 30 years ago. He used to say, "Every line's a promise, and every promise you defend." That line hadn't moved, but someone tried to pretend it had. Now, I had the proof. And next, I'd file it where it couldn't be ignored. I called the HOA office at 9:01 a.m. the next morning, just after they opened. Not because I expected civility, but because I wanted it documented. The phone rang 3 times before a chipper voice answered. "Ridgeway Hills, HOA, this is Jenna." I kept my tone neutral. "Hi, Jenna. I'm calling regarding a boundary dispute. I received a lien from your office, but I'm not under HOA jurisdiction. I'm requesting a copy of the annexation vote and the boundary resolution that allegedly includes my parcel." The pause was brief but telling. "Can I put you on hold for just a moment?" She didn't wait for a response. A minute later, a new voice clicked in, smooth, practiced, and unmistakably hers. "Mr. Rhodes," Karen said, "Now I understand you have some questions about our records." I didn't bother with pleasantries. "I'm requesting a copy of the annexation documentation, any vote records, boundary adjustment filings, or signed acknowledgments that support your lien." Her silence lasted longer this time. "Our internal records are board restricted," she finally said. "That type of documentation is considered part of our executive privilege and not subject to external disclosure." Executive privilege, like she was running a branch of government. I let that hang, then replied, flat and clear. "You filed a lien on my property without jurisdiction. That makes it my business, and potentially a legal matter." Karen's tone sharpened, but she tried to keep the edge wrapped in velvet. "Mr. Rhodes, the Ridgeway Hills Board acted within its authority. If you wish to dispute the charges, we encourage you to do so in writing, but continuing this conversation won't change our position." She hung up before I could reply. Just like that. I didn't slam the phone down. I smiled, because Karen had just confirmed the bluff. No documents, no vote, no consent, only words, only pressure. And pressure can be turned back. I printed out a formal Public Records Act request that afternoon, drove to the county recorder's office in town, and filed it in person. "Boundary annexation records for Ridgeway Hills between 2019 and 2023, I said, handing over the form. The clerk, an older man with calm eyes and a veteran's cap, read it slowly, nodded, and stamped the corner. "You'll get a response within 3 business days. No fuss, no resistance, just process." All real government didn't hide behind clipboards. 3 days later, someone retaliated. It was subtle, but not subtle enough. I was working near the front pasture when I heard the sound, an engine idling just long enough to make a point. When I walked to the gate, the truck was already gone, but something new was flapping on the wire, a bright yellow tag, plastic, zip-tied to the gate latch. Code violation. Notice Ridgeway Hills, HOA, field observation, violation improper equipment, storage portable trailer, uncovered, debris, firewood not stacked, action. Required immediate correction. Failure to comply may result in further enforcement. It was nonsense. The trailer was legal and parked well inside the property line. The woodpile was stacked tighter than a lumberyard's, but the message was clear. Push us. Diane will push back. I photographed the tag, the entire gate, and the surrounding area. Every angle, every timestamp. Then I wrote a formal response on lined paper and took a photo of that too. HOA jurisdiction is unproven and disputed. No compliance will be acknowledged until jurisdiction is legally established. Cease all further notices. Retaliatory actions are being documented. I slid the letter into a plastic sleeve and zip-tied it beneath the violation tag. Then I locked the gate. That night, I added a new tab to the binder. Retaliation Incident Log. Entry 01. Code tag delivered 3 days after HOA call refusal. No prior warning. No foundation for citation. I emailed it all to Jacob. He called 10 minutes later. "They're getting nervous," he said. "That's good. It's also escalation. It's also evidence. He's keep collecting." I woke up the next morning with the rising feeling I hadn't had in years. Focus, tempered with fire. Karen had counted on silence, compliance, the path of least resistance. But I had leverage now, and she was beginning to slip. After lunch, I pulled the 2 maps, my uncle's original survey and the Ridgeway overlay, and taped them side by side on the barn wall. The red marker lines I'd drawn now looked like battle lines. I circled the pasture section they'd claimed and wrote above it, fraudulent overlay, Zone 3, claim, no title support. Below that, I pinned the printed GIS mismatch and the filing receipt for the public records request. My barn wasn't just a workspace now, it was my war room. The air felt different that afternoon, lighter somehow, even as clouds rolled in from the east. I could feel it shifting. This wasn't just a land dispute anymore, it was a case. And Karen's paper trail was starting to fold in on itself. The title office sat behind a bakery in town, faded sign, 1 window, and a front door that stuck a little when you pulled it. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect power to change hands, but that's exactly what I was looking for. Answers, leverage, and something better than the word maybe. Amy Wren looked up from her desk as I walked in. Mid-40s, no-nonsense haircut, no-nonsense tone. She wore reading glasses on a chain and flipped through documents like she was slicing meat. And Jacob had referred me to her with 1 sentence. "Amy's the one they don't want you to talk to." She didn't waste time. "You're the Ridge Hollow property?" she asked, motioning for me to sit. "The one the HOAS circling like buzzards?" "That's me," I said, handing over my binder. She opened it, scanned the first few pages, then stopped on the original deed. "You have this in digital?" I handed her the flash drive. She slid it in, pulled up the file, and started clicking. Within 5 minutes, she leaned back and exhaled. "Well," she said, "this is worse than I thought. For them." She turned her monitor so I could see. "They filed a boundary overlay with the county recorder," she explained. But what they didn't do, and what they were supposed to do, was obtain owner consent or file a quiet title action. She tapped a line on the deed with her pen. "This property is exempt from future subdivision interest unless joined by recorded voluntary covenant." "That's rock solid," she said. "That 1 sentence is worth more than all their maps combined." I nodded, my chest tight with vindication. "They filed anyway." She nodded. "And whoever signed off on that overlay assumed no one would check the original exclusions. Most people don't. But I did, which makes you dangerous." Amy dug deeper. She checked the title insurer's records, the county filing log, and the original HOA overlay notice. She even ran my parcel ID through 3 databases and came up with a match that didn't match. "He said they tagged your parcel as Zone 3 of Ridgeway Hills without recording a covenant," she said. "They claim jurisdiction over land they don't own, based on a procedural vote that holds no legal weight outside their board." I sat with that. They didn't make a mistake. They skipped the law and hoped no one noticed. "What should have happened," Amy said, pulling a fresh form from her drawer, "is a quiet title action, served to you as the landowner, allowing for legal rebuttal. Without it, their overlay is just paper, decorative, but they're treating it like statute. And the title company," she pulled up the policy, "didn't flag the exclusion clause. That's their mistake. If you challenge this and win, and I believe you would, they may owe you coverage for the lien damages. That landed like a sledgehammer. They owe me, she smirked. Or they will. Amy printed off a correction of title form, a legally binding affidavit, sworn and notarized, confirming that the recorded boundary claim by Ridgeway Hills is in conflict with the true deeded boundary, and that the parcel remains outside HOA jurisdiction. We'll file this with the recorder's office, she said. That puts your version of the boundary on official record. Legally speaking, once it's filed, anyone who tries to enforce against you using the overlay is acting in bad faith. Even Karen, especially Karen. I read the document slowly. The legal language was clear. This property has not been voluntarily encumbered by HOA jurisdiction, nor has it been subject to adjudicated boundary adjustments. I signed, she notarized. We made 2 copies, one for me, one for the county. I held it in my hands for a moment before sliding it into a fresh folder. After weeks of notices, threats, and posturing, I finally had something they couldn't ignore, a correction, filed truth. On my way out, Amy handed me a manila envelope. Inside, she said, is a survey affidavit template. If you have someone with survey credentials who can verify your boundary lines against the deed, we'll file that too. Layered documentation always hits harder. Any suggestions? She grinned. I know one guy, but word is he's already helping you. Mike, she nodded. Good man. I drove home with the window cracked, the envelope on the passenger seat like a victory flag. The wind whipped through the cab, carrying the scent of cut hay and something else I hadn't felt in weeks. Momentum. That evening, I laid everything out on the kitchen table. The correction affidavit, Amy's analysis, my deed. The exclusion clause, the title overlay, my GIS screenshots. Karen's lien, I labeled a new divider in my binder. Title corrections, defensive filing. As I slid the paperwork in, I glanced up at the wall where her lien still hung. I took a red pen and wrote across it in the big block letters, void pending. Because it wasn't her paperwork that mattered anymore. It was mine. I sent the letter by certified mail, stamped, dated, and delivered. Inside were 3 pages. 1. A formal demand for lien withdrawal within 10 business days. 2. A copy of Amy's notarized title correction. 3. A warning. Failure to comply would result in legal action, including a quiet title filing and potential damages under wrongful lien statutes. The language wasn't angry, it was cold, surgical. I CC'd Jacob. I CC'd the title underwriter. I even sent a digital copy to the county clerk's office marked for records review. If they wanted to play legal, I was bringing the full deck. Karen didn't respond directly. She retaliated instead. It started with a friend texting me a screenshot. Bro, you see this? It was a post on the Ridgeway Hills HOA website, right on the front page. Delinquent member list. Community, non-compliant properties. Parcel 14-62. Past. Due $4,321.33. Enforcement tier, escalated status, referred for additional action. No address, just parcel numbers. But mine was top of the list. And in a town like this, people knew parcel numbers. The next day I walked into the feed store and heads turned. A few folks nodded, some didn't. One man, local, denim jacket, gray mustache, looked at me and said under his breath, "Should have just paid the fees." That's when I knew Karen wasn't just enforcing policy, she was shaping narrative. The HOA wasn't just playing games on paper anymore. They were trying to humiliate me. I wanted to lash out. But Jacob's words came back to me. Retaliation is their weakness. Document everything. Let them bury themselves in it. So, I pulled out my notebook that night and added a new entry. Retaliatory Act Number 2. Public posting of disputed debt. Date captured. Website URL. Screenshot archived. No due process or acknowledgement of legal challenge. I wrote a second entry beneath it. Social reputational damage. Neighbors aware of internal matter. Feed store incident. Verbal comment. Witnessed by staff. I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was building a case. That weekend, I stayed home. Didn't go into town. Didn't check the gate. Just worked. I rebuilt a section of the old fence near the West Ridge, something my uncle had always said he'd get to next spring. That corner post had always leaned about 7 degrees off plumb. Never quite right. By late afternoon, I had it dug out and replaced. Sunlight hit just right, casting the new post's shadow in a straight line down the fence line. That's when I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. I turned to find an old green pickup easing up the drive. I didn't recognize the truck, but I knew the man the moment he stepped out. "Mike Danner," he said, holding out a hand. "Retired surveyor. You must be Rhodes." I shook his hand. Firm grip. Eyes like a level, steady, calibrated. "I heard you've got a line problem," he said, nodding toward the field. I nodded back. "Karen," he chuckled. "No, that's what I figured." We sat on overturned buckets near the fence post, drinking warm iced tea from a thermos he brought. Turns out Mike had worked for the county in the 90s, helped survey Ridgeway Hills, back when it was just a half-developed cul-de-sac, with big dreams and too many lawyers. "I remember your uncle," he said. "Stubborn, smart, never trusted the HOA types." He was right. Mike reached into his truck and pulled out a battered map tube. Inside was a rolled-up copy of the 1992 survey overlay, one he had drafted himself. He spread it out on the tailgate. "You see this line?" he pointed. "That was their final northern boundary." Then he pointed again, just above it. "This?" he said, tapping my pasture. "This was outside their reach then. And unless someone forged a quiet title action, it still is." I stared at the map. The math wasn't fuzzy. Karen had simply drawn past the limit. "I'll walk it with you," Mike said. "Tomorrow morning, we'll mark every corner. I've still got my gear, might be retired, but my sight's straight." "You do that?" He nodded. "I don't like seeing landlines moved by politics." That night, I added a new label to my binder. Witness support, surveyor affidavit pending. Then I pulled out the printed version of my demand letter, crossed out the line that said, "If uncorrected, legal action will follow," and rewrote it by hand. Legal action in motion. Correction underway. Retaliation noted. Karen had picked the wrong parcel to mess with. And now, she wasn't just up against a signature and a deed, she was up against boots in the dirt. Mike arrived just after sunrise. Had old GMC rattling into the drive like it had a soul. He stepped out wearing a faded Ridge County Survey Division hat, utility vest, and carried a canvas roll slung over one shoulder, filled with stakes, marking flags, and a GPS unit the size of a brick. "I figured we'd beat the heat," he said. The pasture was still wet with dew. Light spilled slow across the ridge, warming fence posts and rusted nails that hadn't moved in decades. We shook hands like men about to dig for something real. He started at the southeast corner, reading bearings off the 1986 survey and comparing them with the one he'd drawn in 92. The language was precise. Degrees, minutes, seconds. Not approximate, not interpretive. "This land hasn't shifted," he said, sighting down a compass. But they drew like it had. We walked slow, methodically. Every 100 feet, he stopped, drove a rebar stake into the ground, then planted a bright orange flag. Each one landed outside the HOA overlay by at least 30 feet. By the third marker, Mike stopped and shook his head. They didn't just guess wrong, they reached wrong. By mid-morning, the line was done. 12 flags forming a clean rectangle through the field, unbroken, unclaimed by anything but sunlight and soil. Mike reviewed the coordinates, cross-referenced them against the county's GIS system on his tablet, then gave a low whistle. "They filed an overlay that directly contradicts the legal record," he said. "And didn't notify you? No title action, no survey counter, nothing." "Then this," he said, holding up the tablet, "is junk, and this," he gestured to the field, "is evidence." Back at the cabin, Mike wrote out an affidavit on his official template, complete with his surveyor license number, date, and parcel coordinates. The surveyed boundary of parcel 14-62, as established by recorded deed and supported by independent verification on this date, lies entirely outside the Ridgeway Hills HOA boundary map, recorded in 2021. The HOA overlay constitutes a boundary misrepresentation inconsistent with county records. He signed it, dated it, then stamped it with a small round seal from his briefcase. It felt like someone had just handed me a sword. I made 5 copies. 3 went into my binder, One marked for the title company, one for the county, one for the HOA. The fourth I filed at the recorder's office that same afternoon. The fifth I kept in a fireproof box next to my uncle's deed. When the clerk stamped it and handed it back, she looked over the top of her glasses and said, "Not many folks walk in here this prepared." I gave a small nod. Had a lot of help from people who know lines better than lawyers. That evening, I walked the fence line again, this time slower. The orange flags fluttered in the breeze, catching the last light like tiny flames. From up on the ridge, you could see the whole outline, real, grounded, undeniable. Karen had drawn a line on a screen. I'd marked one in the dirt. And the difference wasn't just technical, it was truth. When I got home, I updated the timeline on my corkboard. Day 34, independent survey completed. Verifies deed boundary, contradicts, HOA overlay. Affidavit notarized and filed. Then I crossed out the word dispute in the folder title. In red, I wrote, correction established. Karen didn't know it yet, but her bluff had just met its end. And the ground she thought she controlled was never hers to begin with. 2 days after the title correction was recorded, my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered anyway. Her voice was polite, hesitant even. "Mr. Rhodes, this is Karen from Ridgeway Hills. I wanted to reach out personally to clear the air. We may have acted on outdated parcel data, and I believe we'd both benefit from a conversation." For the first time, Karen didn't sound like a president. She sounded like someone about to lose something. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I hung up and opened my email instead. I drafted one message. Subject: boundary correction. Formal notice of filing attachments. Mike's signed and notarized survey affidavit. My 1986 deed with exclusion clause highlighted. The title correction. S county stamped. The GIS overlay mismatch. The lien notice Karen's public delinquent member post, archived. I sent it to 6 recipients: the title underwriter, the lien processor, the Ridge County assessor, the county clerk, Jacob, and Karen. The body of the email was only one line. Please see the attached documentation confirming the recorded boundary correction for parcel 14-62. Any further enforcement action will be considered knowingly unlawful. Then I hit send. The first reply came an hour later from the lien processor. Thank you for providing your documentation. Your parcel has been removed from our collections roster, effective immediately. No further action will be taken. The next came from the title company. We acknowledge the error in applying HOA jurisdiction to your property and will update your file accordingly. Our apologies for the inconvenience. By sunset, I had confirmation from the assessor's office that my land was officially tagged unassociated with any active HOA. Each email printed and filed, each one a nail in Karen's claims. I stepped outside as dust settled. The pasture was quiet, fence line glowing faintly in the low sun. A coyote called somewhere out near the ridge, and for once, the land felt like it was exhaling with me. My name was clean, my title was clean. Karen's paper war had crumbled under the one thing she never expected: someone who fought back correctly. By the next morning, something odd had happened. The Ridgeway Hills website had removed the delinquent member list. Just gone. No explanation, no update, no apology. I checked their community portal, the public map of annexed zones, scrubbed. The only reference left to Zone 3 was a dead link that returned a 404 error. I heard from Dale, my neighbor up the road, that HOA volunteers were quietly removing signs from properties that had been added to the overlay in 2021. Just taking them down, he said. No replacements, no word. Another neighbor mentioned Karen hadn't shown up to the last board meeting. Someone else said she'd taken personal leave. I didn't gloat, didn't celebrate, didn't post online. I just wrote one more entry in my log, day 38, lien voided, files purged, no retaliation to date. Though then I went back outside and removed the yellow plastic violation tag that still dangled from my front gate, snapped it clean. That night, I laid everything out on the dining table. Karen's notices, the forged jurisdiction map, the certified lien. And beneath it all, my deed, Mike's affidavit, the correction, sealed by the county. I stared at it like a battlefield. Paperwork had been her weapon, but I used it better. The Ridgeway Hills board meeting was held in the back of the county library. Fold-out tables, mismatched chairs, a water cooler that hadn't worked in years. But the room was full. Neighbors sat shoulder to shoulder, murmuring in the stale fluorescent light. Some with clipboards, most with questions. Karen was already seated at the front. She wore the same pressed khakis and tight-lipped smile from the day she came to my gate. But tonight, her posture was different, coiled, cautious. The clipboard in front of her didn't look like power anymore. It looked like a shield. Jacob and I sat in the second row. Mike sat on my other side, quiet, survey maps in hand. I hadn't planned to speak, but once they opened the floor, I stood. "I'm David Rhodes," I said. "Parcel 1462. You may recognize the number. It's been on your website for the past few weeks." A few heads turned. Karen blinked but didn't interrupt. "I'm here to make a public record, not to argue, not to speculate, just to read the facts." I pulled out a single sheet. In 2021, the Ridgeway Hills HOA filed a boundary overlay claiming annexation of my property, without notice, without my consent, and without any supporting quiet title action. Based on that filing, a lien was issued against my land. I looked up. No one moved. I continued. I have since filed a correction of title with the county recorder's office, an independent licensed surveyor. I gestured to Mike, verified that my parcel lies entirely outside the HOA's claimed jurisdiction. The lien has been voided, the assessor has updated the file, and the overlay map purged. Karen's fingers tightened on her clipboard. "This is from Section 403 of the State Property Code," I said. Quote, "No HOA may assert authority over any land not formally and voluntarily encumbered by signed covenant or adjudicated boundary correction. Violations subject the association to civil penalties and removal of officer authority." I let the words sink in. The HOA acted outside its legal authority, and worse, once challenged, it retaliated publicly. Someone coughed. Another board member leaned forward, whispering to Karen, but it was Glenn, the treasurer, who spoke next. He looked down the table, then at me. "I was never shown the annexation filing," he said, "or the vote. I didn't even know we were adding parcels." Karen didn't move. Glenn kept going. "We're supposed to vote on annexations. Baltic, we're supposed to serve notice. I never saw a single service affidavit. Nothing. If what you're saying is true..." "It's all documented," I said, holding up the binder. He nodded once, then turned to Karen. "I can't be part of this anymore." He stood up, took off his name badge, and walked out. The room was dead quiet. Karen finally spoke, voice tight, rehearsed. The board acted under a broad interpretation of community interest and expansion authority. There was precedent. "No," I said, calm, firm. There was overreach. And this time, the room didn't disagree. Karen adjourned the meeting early, called it an administrative recess pending legal clarification. People trickled out slower than they came in. Some lingered, others nodded at me, carefully, like they weren't sure what side of history they had just witnessed. Yes, Mike clapped me on the back on the way out. Jacob said, "That wasn't a comment period. That was a deposition with an audience." I didn't smile, but I did feel something click into place. Not revenge, not even justice. Just pressure released. That night, I added the meeting notes to the binder. Labeled the tab, "Chapter Close, Public Record of Misconduct." And for the first time in over a month, I slept without the weight of someone else's false authority pressing against my property lines. Karen had built her power on assumption. Tonight I watched it fold. It wasn't over. The meeting may have broken the illusion, but the system hadn't moved yet. Karen still held her title. The HOA still existed. And I knew how these things worked. If no one higher stepped in, it would just get swept into silence. Thus, but 2 days after the board meeting, a letter arrived from the Ridge County Council's office. Letterhead, formal language, no fluff. "You are being contacted as a key witness in an open investigation into Ridgeway Hills HOA filings recorded between 2019 and 2023. Your documentation has been received. Please prepare to provide testimony and certified copies of all relevant materials." I read it twice, then once more. This wasn't just about my land anymore. They were opening a review. I called Jacob immediately. "They're investigating," I said. He didn't even sound surprised. Good. Think they'll actually do something? If they've asked you to testify, they already found something. Later that week, Dale came by the ranch. He held a folder in his hand and a question in his eyes. "You were right," he said. I let him in, and he spread out the documents on my kitchen table. Photocopies of his deed, a survey from the late 70s, and a lien that looked eerily like mine. "Same annexation year," he said, 2021, but my property predates Ridgeway Hills entirely. He hadn't fought it when the notice came. He'd just paid, reluctantly, quietly, and out of fear. Now he realized he wasn't alone. We found one more, and then another. 3 landowners with parcels outside Ridgeway's original footprint. 3 liens, 3 fraudulent annexation filings, and not one of them had signed a covenant or received notice. The pieces were snapping together. Karen hadn't made a mistake. She'd made a blueprint. With Jacob's help, I organized the files into a multi-party complaint and submitted it directly to the county counsel's office. And we met with their legal investigator the following week, a tall, no-nonsense woman named Elise who wore her badge like a boundary line. She didn't mince words. "We've had 3 similar complaints in the last 6 months," she said, "but yours is the first with full documentation." She flipped through my binder like a prosecutor, preparing her opening argument. "You filed a title correction?" "Yes." "And served formal notice of challenge?" "Certified mail. Included the deed, survey affidavit, and boundary overlays." She closed the folder. "That's enough to open a quiet title abuse claim." I'd never heard the phrase before. "Quiet title abuse," Elise explained. "When an organization files a boundary assertion or overlay without notice, consent, or legal process, and uses it to extract financial payments, that's a form of title manipulation. In some counties, it's a civil violation. In ours, it borders on criminal fraud." She paused. "If we can prove intent, the board could be liable." Personally, Karen's clipboard didn't look so powerful now. Within a week, formal letters were sent from the county to the Ridgeway Hills Board. They requested all annexation votes from 2019 to 2023, service notices to affected parcels, title change records, legal counsel documentation authorizing lien enforcement. Jacob read the list and laughed. "They're not going to have half of this." "That's the point," I said. I didn't hear from Karen, but neighbors started knocking on my door. One brought over banana bread and asked how to file one of those affidavits. Another just shook my hand and said, "We've been dealing with her for years. We just didn't know we had options." The story was spreading, and with it, the truth. What had started as a fight over a fence post was becoming something else. Exposure, correction, maybe even reform. At the end of the month, I received an official notice from County Council. A formal review of Ridgeway Hills HOA filings has begun. Your evidence will be included in the assessment. Additional parties have joined your complaint. You may be called to testify at a sanctions hearing. It didn't promise a verdict, but it was movement. It was oversight. And for the first time, Karen wasn't in control of the process. The county was. That night, I sat on the porch, flipping through the binder under a full moon. There were nearly a dozen labeled tabs now. One said deed, one said survey, one said lies, and the newest, county action. I slid the sanction notice into a fresh plastic sleeve. Then I looked out across the dark field, toward the ridgeline that had once been the border between peace and pressure. Karen had crossed it, but now the system was finally walking in behind her. The hearing was set for Tuesday morning, not in a courtroom, but in the county administrative building, 3rd floor, room B, 211. It smelled like laminate tile and coffee left too long in a burner pot. Still, it had gravity. A seal on the wall, a recording mic on the table, and a name placard that read, Ridge County Administrative Law Tribunal, hearing on HOA boundary actions. This wasn't symbolic. This was official. Karen had been summoned. So had I. I wore the same boots I'd repaired 3 times. Mike wore his surveyor's vest, even though no one asked him to. Jacob came in a gray suit that didn't match the tone of the room, but made the point anyway. We sat in a row, documents in hand. Karen sat across from us. She was paler than I'd seen her, dressed in a blazer too sharp for the setting, alone, no other board members flanking her this time. Just one HOA attorney who looked like he'd been briefed only 10 minutes before walking in. He didn't bring much, but I brought everything. The presiding officer, a county attorney named Myers, opened the hearing by reading the complaint aloud. This tribunal will hear evidence regarding the Ridgeway Hills HOA's recorded annexation filings between 2019 and 2023, specifically concerning parcels outside original subdivision and boundaries, recorded without consent or court action, and followed by enforcement through financial liens. Today's matter, parcel 14-62. I felt every eye turn toward me. I stood. My voice didn't shake. I began with the deed. Read the boundary aloud, then the overlay map, then the notice of lien, then the title correction, then Mike's affidavit. I placed each one into the official record, time-stamped, copied, and indexed. The panel asked questions. Had I been served notice of annexation? No. Had I signed any covenant? Never. Was the overlay map filed with a quiet title? That's not according to the county recorder. Then they turned to Karen. She cleared her throat. Ridgeway Hills acted in the interest of cohesive community governance, she said. During the 2021 expansion, the board voted to incorporate adjacent parcels for aesthetic uniformity and resource sharing. Aesthetic uniformity, Jacob muttered beside me. The presiding officer raised a hand. Ms. Carr, did your board provide service of annexation to affected landowners? She glanced down. We posted public notice at the clubhouse. It was available for review. That's not service, the officer replied flatly. And it does not meet statutory requirement. Karen shifted. Her lawyer looked away. Mike stood to testify. He read his field notes, his measurements, and pointed to the mismatch between the deed and the HOA's overlay. There was no survey filed with their claim, he said. No coordination with the assessor's base layer, no peer review. They drew over the land like it was a suggestion. That landed hard. The tribunal nodded. The county council rep spoke next. We've reviewed 3 additional complaints mirroring Mr. Rhodes's case. All involve post-2019 annexation overlays filed without notice, consent, or title action. Ridgeway Hills has created a pattern of overreach. The presiding officer turned back to Karen. This is not a procedural error, he said. This is a systemic failure of process and respect for boundary law. Then came the verdict. The HOA was fined. $10,000 in civil penalties for failure to follow proper annexation procedures and for misrepresenting authority in recorded documents. Karen, as acting president, was personally sanctioned. She would no longer be allowed to sign or submit boundary-related filings on behalf of the HOA without external legal review and prior approval from the county. The overlay map was to be revoked. All improper liens were to be canceled within 30 days. My case, the officer said, was now resolved in full. I didn't nod, didn't smile, just exhaled. Quiet justice always lands louder than the kind people yell about. After the hearing, Karen left without a word. Not to me, not to the panel. Her clipboard was gone. So was the certainty she'd always worn like armor. The gavel didn't slam. There was no applause. Just a ruling. Just truth, finely carved into the record. Back home, I added one last tab to the binder. Hearing, resolution, and sanctions. Inside, and I placed the verdict, the fine summary, the personal restriction notice, and a final note from the tribunal. The county recognizes the corrective efforts of the complainant in identifying and exposing a pattern of procedural abuse. That was the closest I'd ever get to a thank you, and it was enough. It came in a plain envelope, no threats, no stamps marked certified. Just a simple return address in clean font. Eagle Star Title Services. Inside was a single page. Mr. Rhodes, we acknowledge and regret the oversight in the 2021 Ridgeway Hills Overlay expansion concerning parcel 14-62. Following review of your deed, the filed correction of title, and the supporting survey affidavit, your property is confirmed to be fully exempt from HOA jurisdiction. Yes, the previously recorded lien has been fully removed from all title records. No further action is required on your part. We apologize for the disruption this caused. I read it 3 times, folded it once, and slid it into the front sleeve of the binder over every notice Karen had sent. Not rage, not triumph, just relief. clean and quiet. The next morning, I drove into town and checked the county property portal one last time. My parcel showed boundary dispute, resolved. Jurisdiction, none. Status, free and clear. It felt like pulling a thorn you'd forgotten was even there. Later that afternoon, I got a short email from the county. Per order of the Administrative Tribunal, all Ridgeway Hills HOA overlay maps have been rescinded. No future jurisdiction may be asserted on any parcel without formal title judgment and owner consent. Parcel 14-62. Restriction noted. It was bureaucratic language, but to me, it was a locked gate they could never open again. Karen never reached out. Not after the hearing, not after the fine, not after the board published a quiet leadership transition notice on their website. Her name was gone from the masthead within the week. No apology, no explanation. Just an empty square where her face used to be. That was fine. I didn't need closure from her. I'd already taken it back from the land. I spent the next few days cleaning up the gate, repainted the metal, tightened the hinges, redug the post supports. Then I mounted a new sign, Private Ranch. No HOA jurisdiction, title filed, survey recorded, county confirmed. Below it, I bolted a smaller plaque, land protected by deed, not politics. It wasn't for Karen, it was for me, for the neighbors, for anyone watching, for proof. That evening, I sat out by the fence with a cold beer and let the sun fall behind the ridgeline. The orange flags from Mike's survey still stood in the soil, faded but firm. Like tiny monuments to a fight won on paper and principle. I remembered what my uncle always said, land doesn't protect itself, you do. He'd meant fences back then. I hadn't known it would one day mean legal filings, county hearings, and a battle against the smiling force of bureaucracy. But the truth held, and now, so did the deed. I went back inside, opened the binder one last time, and added a handwritten note to the back cover, resolution complete. Karen defeated not by anger, but by record, by patience, by truth. Then I closed it. Not just the binder, but the fight. The knock on the door came just after lunch, soft, hesitant, like the person behind it wasn't sure if they should be there. I opened it to find a man about my age, holding a folded paper map and wearing a cautious smile. Your roads? All right, I nodded. I heard what you did. He glanced down at his boots, then back up. I think they tried to rope my place in too. Never got a notice, but the line on their map runs right through my barn. I invited him in, made coffee, sat him at the table where I'd once spread out every false filing they tried to use against me. I pulled out a spare copy of my binder, pared down now, clean, just the essentials. I handed it to him like I was passing on a compass. Start here, I said. He wasn't the only one. Over the next few weeks, word spread, not loud, not online, not with signs or protests, just quiet conversations over fences and coffee counters. Turns out Ridgeway Hills had cast a wider net than even the county realized. Parcels had been tagged for enforcement that had never joined, never consented, never even knew. The HOA's board began to shrink. Volunteers stopped showing up. Meetings were canceled. The newsletter dried up to a single quarterly page with gardening tips and a list of bylaws no one wanted to enforce anymore. Karen didn't return. Some said she moved. Others said she resigned quietly and stayed in town, keeping her head low. Didn't matter, her power was gone, and the fear she built, on paper and posture, had burned off like morning fog. I drove the ridge one evening in early fall, just as the leaves started to go golden at the edges. Same road I rode with my uncle when I was 12. Same trail he taught me to fence, to track runoff, to listen for the things that didn't make noise but meant something. Up top, the land was open and breathing again. No lines, no signs, no false claims. You'd just whined and pine and the sound of something that felt like home. I stopped the truck, got out, and walked to the fence post. Mike and I had reset earlier that summer. The orange survey flag was long gone, but the rebar was still there. I kicked at the dirt around it and found the steel, solid and unmoved. That line, my line, was still holding, and always would. On the way back down, I passed Dale patching his fence. He waved. No more hesitation in his eyes, just the casual nod of a man who'd seen someone stand up and decided to do the same. A few driveways later, I spotted one of the old HOA signs lying in a ditch, half buried in weeds. I didn't stop to pick it up. Let the dirt reclaim it. Some things are better buried. At the gate, or I paused to read the sign I'd hung weeks ago. Private ranch. No HOA jurisdiction. Title filed. Survey recorded. County confirmed. The metal had dulled from sun and dust, but it still stood, and no one had touched it. That mattered more than any ruling ever could. That night, I made a fire, not to burn anything, but just to sit with it. There was nothing left to destroy, nothing left to prove. The binder stayed closed on the shelf next to my uncle's hat and the folded American flag from his funeral. The wind moved through the trees the same way it always had, unbothered, untaxed, unregulated. I watched the flames flicker and let the silence stretch. It wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. I took one last ride the next morning, saddled up and headed north, following the line of the property with no destination but closure. The perimeter trail was quiet, familiar. The brush had grown back where the survey flags had been. The only markers now were the old corner posts and the memories that didn't need documentation. When I reached the far end of the ridge, I stopped. Looked back at the house, the barn, the gate. 12 acres of inheritance. 12 acres of resistance. 12 acres that stayed mine because I didn't let someone redraw what had already been written. I pulled the reins, turned the horse toward the cabin, and rode back slow. No hurry, no threat at my heels. Because Ridgeway had been reclaimed, not by force, but by facts, by paper, by the unshakable truth of where the line was, and the will to defend it.